All right, welcome to yet another edition of the Grim Wisdom podcast. The idea, as always, is we're going to give you so much truth you're going to beg us to stop. With me today, again, is Gavin and my lovely wife, Jennifer. Gavin is my brother, but he's not very lovely.
What's up?
That might not be pleasant, but it's the truth. So what we're going to talk about today, I actually did the big boy thing. I made a list of topics that I disseminated to my team here, and we're just going to go down the list. What we're going to talk about first is there was an article on RI Future, which Jennifer read, Gavin couldn't find it, and I didn't, because I thought I'd just tell him the essentials. The guy here in Rhode Island, for those of you that just tune out whenever I talk about Rhode Island politics, this will be a universal fact here, but guy in Rhode Island, so he works for the Speaker of the House, and he's on the team that makes the budget. Right, so you understand there's a document called the budget. That's pretty much where most of the screwing over of citizenry happens, is in the budget, because it's this huge must-pass document that they always get to at the end of the session. They do it in Congress, they do it at all the states. So there's this thing called the budget, but someone has to actually go through and do the busy work of writing the whole budget. And of course, you can't expect these legislators to do any work themselves. I mean, they just raise money and...
Well, that's what they have interns for.
Exactly. Right? That's what interns are for.
That's what
the interns write the budget.
Right, and that's actually what drones are for, because this guy is a Mattiello drone, and Mattiello was paying him $155,000 a year of our state money to craft the budget for him, which is fine. I mean, that seems a little high, but the budget is important, so whatever.
Right.
But the interesting thing is that for the last 3 years, he's also gotten free tuition as a benefit of this other job he had at Rhode Island College. Only he didn't have the job. Because when
he was on a leave of absence.
Exactly. So when Mattiello hired him to do this budget drone garbage, and they paid him $155,000 a year, he had this old job at Rick that he was making $80,000 a year. Right. So basically half as much, little over half as much at Rhode Island College. Yeah. And obviously he took the Mattiello job, but he told them he might come back to Rick, and that allowed him to be on leave with the idea that he might come back someday to his job. And you could see why unions, as part of their contract negotiations, would want something like that. I mean, it seems like a sort of a silly benefit for ordinary unions, but you could see why maybe a college union might have rules for a sabbatical, or where somebody could go to another school and do some like learning or whatever. I mean, it kind of makes sense. This guy, the usual limit is 6 months, but he gold-bricked it for 3 years, where he was on leave from Rhode Island College. And the reason he bricked it, of course, was because he was collecting over $50,000 in free tuition for a child of his, and also a, quote, guardian, whatever that means. When confronted about this, he said, oh, well, my union negotiated the contract, and I just did what I'm allowed to do under the contract. Only, obviously, leave isn't meant for a guy that's clearly left the job, clearly gone forever. The only way he's going to lose this Mattiello job is if he falls out of disfavor with Mattiello, and it pays twice as much. So it's not a situation where, like, an ordinary person might say, oh, well, I'll take this job that pays a little more, but if I don't like it, maybe I'll go back to my old one. You can kind of see it. No, in this case, they'd hired a replacement for him years ago, but they kept saying, oh, well, yeah, you can continue to be on leave as part of the union's contract negotiations. And the reason they did that, of course, is because the guy that controls the budget gets to decide how much Rhode Island College gets of state money. Yeah. So obviously Rhode Island College is never going to kick up a stint about this obvious corruption, because he's the guy that drafts the budget. He can easily just move a 0 or a 5, right, yeah. and cost them way more than it cost them in basically legalized bribery to keep him happy. He claimed that this was all fine. It's crazy, because obviously he knew what he was doing. He obviously knew he was swindling.
He was working the
system. Well, that's what makes it bad.
He probably thought he was clever, that he knew he was working the system.
Yeah, and I actually don't think he's in any trouble.
Oh, no, there's nothing we can do to him, because it's factually true that everything he did he was entitled to by the union negotiations, and that they repeatedly specifically extended his leave long past the bounds where it would normally have lapsed. So all that is true. But what's the union or the college going to say? Are they going to say, no, you don't work here anymore? Well, then he's in a position just by writing the budget, because none of these legislators even have time to read it. He could easily just move a 0 or a decimal point a few zeros over and cost the college way more than it costs them to keep him happy. And nobody would even say boo about it if it was a small expense. He could easily just say, oh, well, Rhode Island College gets $200,000 less this year, and we're going to redirect it to URI. And nobody anywhere in the community would ever have a problem with that, except for the union at Rhode Island College, right? So obviously they're going to pay him this $50,000 of bribe money to keep him happy. And we all know this. This all makes sense. But
Yeah.
that's just ridiculous that the culture is to that point. That that's not a crime. Don't you think?
I think he just worked the system. It wasn't like Gallison, who just got paid for something that didn't even exist.
Well, when you're
Gallison, who got $65,000 a year for.
It's definitely exploiting the system. But
I
again,
don't think it's illegal.
It's not illegal, and it's not even uncommon. Like, that's why it's not shocking.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the point that I'm trying to get to, is you're talking about Gallison. So for those who don't know, Gallison was a state representative, and he was taking this legislative grant program. It's basically free money that you can give out to nonprofits in your district. It's another form of legalized bribery, right? You, the state representative, you write this check to nonprofits in your district or your pet projects, and in return, they return bennies or votes, right? Because they know that if you ever lose your office and are replaced, that the new person will be low man on the totem pole. He won't have as much money to dole out. So it's basically a scam. The intent being for people to allocate money to deserving projects in their districts, but in reality, it always goes to, things that can return votes.
Yeah, so this story does not seem. He just worked the system. I understand that he had access to the budget and he could have given them less money. Who knows? But it's not like he did anything illegal.
Bottom line is the guy was funneling money to a neighborhood organization that at one time did exist, that he had a leadership role in, but then didn't exist, and so he was basically just pocketing the grant money. And that you can't do, right? There was no kids' little league or whatever a sensible purpose was. But the point is, it's morally questionable anyway. It's morally sort of difficult to justify anyway, even when you're not directly swindling the thing. And when you have this guy, where this guy is doing this thing that, I'm not saying that it's illegal. I'm saying that the whole point is that it wasn't illegal for him to obviously swindle the Rhode Island College unions in this way, and the union couldn't say who about it.
Yeah, but a lot of people do this kind of stuff. I mean, even capitalism itself is a way of going around regulations and swindling people out of certain money. I mean,
I think that's maybe an over-reductionist view of capitalism, the broad economic system. That certainly describes Wall Street, I think, in the stock markets. But certainly capitalism does love these situations where you can swindle people. I mean, I'm not denying that. But that's exactly the point I'm trying to make, is here you have this thing, obviously shouldn't be allowed, but is allowed, and that you, as the voter and the citizen,
because you think that it doesn't happen, or if you're naive enough to believe that it doesn't happen.
No, I think it's allowed because of people like you, Jennifer. No, because when people hear about it, they just sort of roll their eyes and say, "What can you do?" And they have this expectation that everybody is trading on their office all the time, and that doesn't even register. Like, they move the bar down so low for what principled behavior is for people in office that it's hard to even convince people this is something that you should be outraged about, because it's so commonplace I'm sure politics everywhere.
There's levels of not outrage, but there's levels of working the system that are worse, that are illegal, and then some things that aren't so bad.
The problem is that most people's judgment of that, I think, is just based on the legality. Like, is it legal? Is it not legal? Oh, well, then...
And here, too, the whole point is this is extortion, but because lawyers, the way that they construct what extortion is it requires certain utterances to be made. So the power dynamic here is clearly extortion, because the union can't risk kicking him off of his benefit, because they can't risk displeasing the guy that makes the budget, right? Their entire livelihood could be damaged if they go after this guy and they don't just pay him his bribe money, right? So it's better for them just to pay. But because he never says, pay or I'll crush you in the budget, it doesn't rise to the legal level of extortion, even though I think to any fair-minded observer, clearly extortion is a fair description of the power dynamic at work here.
Yeah, so
you're saying we shouldn't be outraged about extortion, or?
Outraged, I think. Well, is there a solution?
Well, the solution...
I mean, outraged to do what?
Well, that's the point I'm getting to, is there isn't there isn't a solution under this system because we have no way of addressing this problem, right? We can't pass any laws that won't be immediately subverted or worked around. We can't throw this guy out of office because he's immune. It's difficult, but not necessarily impossible, to lay his crimes at the feet of Mattiello. So in theory, you could replace the guy that appointed him and then have a new guy that would appoint somebody else. But in practice, what will happen is if we replace Mattiello, it'll be a new Democratic majority leader who will also want to keep him there out of an idea of camaraderie. Right? And so the point is, you as the voter, there is no solution within the context of the system. You just have to accept that this guy is going to extort you. And the reason I'm bringing this up is to point out that although this might seem mundane, if you think about it enough, the only conclusion is that our system is irretrievable, is the argument that I'm making.
Yeah, I don't think it's mundane, but I think it gets across that point pretty good.
Okay. Jennifer's struggling like she's not really persuaded, but we'll just cut that. We'll just cut this out, so none of you'll know that. You'll just assume that she totally agreed with me. Of course, she's the editor, so maybe she won't cut it out.
So she's going to cut it out where you said, "Oh, I guess I'm wrong."
Great.
Except I just said that, so she couldn't use my voice.
Let me just take my foot out of my mouth here. All right, moving on to the next thing. Here's another thing that's flawed about our society, although in some ways less troubling, in some ways more. The army, or the armed forces, I don't know if it was actually the army per se, but the nebulous armed forces decided that they were going to do some pretty hardcore military exercises and war games here in Providence and another couple of communities around the state of Rhode Island. And when we're talking about war games, we're talking about, people with blanks running around firing at each other in the streets. We're talking about explosions being set off.
Yeah, they
part of their war games.
You'll hear explosions like gunfire, possibly.
You may hear gunfire and explosions at 3 a.m. There may be low-flying helicopters.
People fly helicopters.
There are pictures of things where the helicopters flew so low that they damaged trees and stuff. There's some pictures of that. So the initial outrage was a lot of people said, well, we got no notification, we had no idea this was going to happen. In fact, there was notification that went out. It wasn't very aggressive or thorough, right? There was no attempt to notify everybody. There was just this feeling of, if we're doing war games on your block, we'll put a flyer on your door or in your mailbox.
That what they did?
That's what they did. This is literally the notification they did. You'll get a flyer.
A letter?
No, they didn't mail you a letter. They just stuck something on your door if you were in one of the most affected areas. And everybody else, depending on the news outlet that you heard, you might have heard about it. It got mentioned. I remember reading or hearing about it on the Facebooks, but obviously I can't find the reference quickly because Facebook doesn't let you go back. But I remember vaguely hearing there were going to be these military exercises. But the point is, so they did notify people, but they made no effort to make sure their notification was effective, right? It was more like, well, we're just meeting our legal obligation to notify you.
Well, that doesn't bother me as much as the fact that they're doing it.
Right.
I think I read something. I don't know how much I can confirm this, but I think I read something that said that they actually handed out, or sent out, a letter, like a pamphlet kind of thing, saying, "Oh yeah, hey, we're going to shoot off some."
That's what I'm talking about. Is people reported having it put on their doors and stuff, but they didn't. I don't think they did a mailing.
But even that was, from what I heard, restricted to very small areas where they were supposedly going to keep this thing. I'm doing air quotes, but they're going to keep this thing in line,
Right.
In just these concentrated areas.
But if a bomb goes off 2 blocks away, you're going to be worried about your block, even if your block is out of bounds for the war game. So the point is, there was a lot of concerns about notification being insufficient. A lot of people talking about how they had no idea this was going to happen. But the real thing is that it happened at all.
Yeah.
And that there was no... It
scares me very much. It scares me that Trump is thinking about cracking down on urban American cities.
Well, we don't necessarily know that.
That's an extreme, but it could be.
It feels like mobilization to a friendly national unit, area. You know
yes.
What I mean? I think what's happening is the drones, the people that are actually doing the fighting, they've been told, and this makes sense to them, that they're training for urban areas in other countries.
Yeah, of course.
Right? And the military has such a huge budget, they could build a fake city and blow it up if they wanted.
Yeah, of course.
Right? Easily. For the cost of a third of a nuclear submarine.
You don't come into a place... You don't come into an existing American city and frighten people. That is ridiculous.
Well, for all we know, it does happen, and we've been fortunate in that hasn't happened in our communities. This sort of thing doesn't get widely reported, and the military always gets their way in the end. I remember reading an article, I think it was 2 years ago, or maybe a year ago, about how the military wanted to do war games above the Arctic Circle, and they were going to be, like some serious war games with a whole bunch of nuclear submarines. The sonar pings are devastating to the wildlife in the area.
Yeah,
right?
the way they
echolocate. So when you fire off a military grade active sonar ping, anything within range, their brain gets shredded. So
I think most of the problem was that it would deafen them, so they wouldn't be able to use their echolocation anymore, at all.
Right.
So yeah,
and in particular, there were native tribes up there that are totally dependent on the fisheries to survive. And they were going to be setting off depleted uranium ordnance, the whole 9 yards, live ammo, everything else. Apart from the concerns about endangered species and wildlife and the native people, there's also this fact that, you're poisoning this area forever and you're killing the whales.
Yeah, I guess you're saying that there was a very limited announcement of this happening, and there was no outlet for the public to say, hey, we don't want this
because
here.
the public doesn't get to say no to the military.
No.
In I suspect any country, but particularly in America. And that's the point that I was getting at. Like you said, it's bad that it happened, but it's not necessarily bad that it happened. Because I could see somebody that had been programmed to think that we have to train to fight in urban environments, making a case that it needed to happen in some city.
Yeah, there is no way it had to happen here. I don't believe there's anything.
Right, but then problem with that is that reduces to, let's put it in the poor neighborhood. Right, let's put it in the poorest regions, which they probably already do.
No, why don't they just build a city like you're saying?
Yeah, well, that's what they should do.
I think that would be a better use of tax dollars than paying billions of dollars for stuff that's obsolete. They do already. We know they do. They spent billions of dollars on these jets and shit. And they got better ones already. They're never going to use them. They're like, no, we got the better ones. Why would we want that crap?
Well, we got to fulfill the contract. The stockholders got to get paid.
It's the military-industrial complex. It's like a big part of our economy is driven by this private companies even.
Right.
These military contracts.
Oh, I agree, but I'm not talking about the military industrial complex right now. I'm pointing out that you do not have the right to say no to the military, that the perspective of all the elites is that even the most perfunctory notification satisfies all of their moral and legal obligations to us. That they can just nail the thing, and if we organize and we got an outcry, maybe we get it so the next time they notify us more thoroughly, but most likely we don't even get that, and certainly we don't get the right to refuse them, because they'll figure, no one will want us.
Well, probably not in this administration either. He would give a damn.
No, but I think that's just in general.
I think you're being naive if you think that it wouldn't happen under Obama, but yes, it's worse now. I agree. So we've made this point that in America you have no right to refuse the military anything they want to do. If they want to exercise in your neighborhood, you just have to let it happen. That's a pretty potent structural flaw with our government. There's no democracy if you can't say no. So the next thing, I was going to this list, but Jennifer got rid of the list because she's looking.
Yeah, I was going to look something up, but I will go back to the list.
I just need to look at the next thing on the list here.
Okay, and I will look at...
how you have a revolution. So, now you can look up your thing.
Okay, because it's regarding what we're talking about.
I'll graciously allow you to have your phone back now.
Oh, thank you.
Next thing I want to talk about is there's this problem. Liberal intellectuals, which I think we can still describe ourselves as liberal and intellectual because we're having this conversation and we're using big words, so that makes us intellectual, and we're not conservatives. Although the word liberal in some groups has a kind of a negative connotation because you hear Hillary Clinton describe herself as a liberal.
Or progressive.
Or progressive, right.
Oh my God.
So there's not really a term we can use except the far left, right? But far left intellectuals like ourselves, maybe that's a better way of phrasing it. Far left intellectuals like ourselves have this prejudice. We are predisposed to favor nonviolence over violence. And that is part of our cultural programming, and it's also part of, we would expect that because a core principle that we believe in is the dignity of everybody, the sanctity, not necessarily the sanctity, because sanctity is maybe too religious a word, but the value of all human life, regardless of its race or creed. One of the things that history teaches us is that over and over and over again, nonviolent, collective, caring societies based on mutual cooperation and respect get steamrolled by violent, militaristic societies that believe that they are superior. Every time those two go up against each other,
I agree.
The violent ones win.
I agree. I think it's almost a myth that people look at MLK and Gandhi and say that we can bring these movements on through nonviolence. Now, they did, and it was a great success, but I think it's limited.
Well, I think
it's limited.
I think there are other examples like resisting apartheid in South Africa, but the key thing is if you're looking for not necessarily cosmetic, I'm looking for a word between cosmetic and structural. If you're looking for change within the system, right? If you're looking to realign not the overarching power structure, but who moves between the different levels or what the ease is with which you move between the different levels.
Yes.
If you're trying to make the pyramid, broader or narrower at the base, or if you're allowing different races of people to move through the pyramid, that could be change that is perceived as being important, but you're still a pyramid. You're still all being crushed by the jerks at the top,
I know exactly what you're saying, because Martin Luther King fought against segregation. That is one part. There is still racism.
Oh, and
how do you kill that? I mean, before we got rid of slavery, that was through violence.
Mm-hmm. It comes to the point where racism is a good one. We were going to get to that later in the podcast.
I like how I'm going to read how you put this topic. How do you have a revolution when the good guys don't have any weapons? I like that.
Well, I was just a conversation starter. I think that might be putting it a little baldly, but yeah, that's the basic point. So I guess we'll get to racism a little later, but
we're all over
racism
the place,
racism is a great example because Martin Luther King did all this stuff, and there was a period where there was desegregation, right? Mm-hmm. And Jennifer and I have talked about this ad nauseum in our personal lives. When Jennifer was going to school, there was this thing called busing, right? And what busing is for Gavin and I, we grew up in rural Oregon, so long after the era of busing, and there weren't even any minorities in Oregon because they weren't allowed to live there.
I grew up in a city, and there were poor sections of the city and wealthy sections and middle class sections. So there would be even the elementary schools, which were local. Of course, the white kids got to walk to the elementary school, but the kids from the poorer neighborhoods were bused.
Right. So that's
into all the different neighborhoods.
That's what busing is. It's to get around segregation and the problem of the wealthy neighborhoods having better schools. Busing was this thing where they forced the wealthy schools to accept kids from low-income neighborhoods, and they would bus them in. And we didn't have that in Oregon because Oregon's constitution said no black people, and it had ended anyway as a real American thing by the time we were going to school. But Jennifer remembers this.
Shortly before we were born, it was still illegal for black people to own property or anything in Oregon. Oregon is a crazy place.
They didn't enforce the Constitution necessarily, but the point is if it says in your Constitution...
The point is Oregon has a pretty terrifying, messed up history as far as the racial issue is concerned.
Yes, it does.
So I do remember going to school with kids that, lived in housing projects and mm-hmm. that kind of thing.
Right.
And I was exposed to a variety of...
It worked very well at ending segregation, and it was outrageously unpopular, and resistance to it continued to harden over the years. It wasn't one of these things where we just like to believe that that familiarity won't breed contempt, that the more you're exposed to different people of racial or cultural groups, that you'll just become less of a hater. But that didn't actually happen with busing, is that the groups that were opposed to it got harder and harder and worked harder and harder to subvert it, and eventually they just gave up trying to desegregate the schools. And now America's schools are arguably more segregated than they've ever been, particularly in the North, right? Most particularly in New York State, in Rhode Island, in the North generally defined, has extremely segregated schools because they stopped doing busing. Boston, for example, very bad situation there with segregation. So, you achieved this goal, but it was temporary because you didn't destroy the structure of racism. Right. You only moved some things around in the pyramid, and your changes, maybe they were permanent, maybe they weren't, maybe some of them made a difference for a while, then they didn't. But overall, the structure still is black people must be oppressed, black people must be denied property. And that's another thing, too. This is a bit of a digression, but you and I were talking about this earlier. During the last recession, tremendous amounts of black wealth were wiped out by the last recession, by the Great Recession. Because they had been, I wouldn't say systematically, but that makes it sound more organized than it was. It was just random people swindling black people because they were insufficiently sophisticated to understand complicated legal financial documents and insufficiently wealthy to hire lawyers to unpack them for them.
I would say intentionally overly complicated.
Right. Intentionally overly complicated.
Yeah.
So they would sell them loans, they'd sell them insurance that was designed not to protect them but to protect the companies, and then they'd sell them again because that insurance premium was a huge kick to them. And there were all sorts of swindles that went on. And eventually, our first black president came up with this program that was designed to deal with the problem. But by that time, virtually all the black wealth had been wiped out again. Virtually all the people that were in the black families, it came too late. I was able to take advantage of it because I was able to stay in my home for a longer period of time because I had family wealth to leverage, because my mortgage wasn't as bad, right? Because I hadn't been aggressively sold a mortgage that was designed to swindle me. But all these black families that have been putting all their money into their mortgages, building their homes like they're supposed to with the American dream, all wiped out. Every generation, some new thing happens to wipe out all the wealth that black Americans have managed to accumulate.
Wow. And the new Jim Crow, that's been going on since the 90s.
Absolutely. And of course, what is the conversation like immediately after? The conversation is not, why do we keep seeing con men targeting the minority community? Why are they so vulnerable to being swindled? Right? What are the structural problems?
Vulnerable.
Right. But instead of saying, how do we correct their vulnerability, we say, well, we never should have given black people loans in the first place. That was a bad idea. And huge parts of the country really believe that. They don't put it in quite that bold terms.
It's one of those things that they can pull it off.
Right, those people.
With the proper legalese and their crazy overcomplicated crap.
Yeah.
And just people can't possibly understand it unless you're a lawyer, because that's the whole point.
Right.
It's part of the bigger problem that we were talking about before, where it's like, well, a lot of people think of it as, oh, well, it's legal, so that makes it so it's not wrong. I mean, it might not be good, but it's legal, so what are you going to do?
Right.
Yep.
Right.
It's that
or
same
they should
mentality.
have known better, or they should have known better,
Right.
or they were, it's too good of a deal. Is it such a terrible thing to believe or to have trust in someone else? I mean, that's the whole deal.
I would say yes,
That's
because
the
this is the
problem.
GrimWisdom podcast, but
It becomes victim blaming.
It
as a whole
becomes,
thing
that's
too,
what they
and
would
that
say.
Further culturally is another form of oppression,
they
basically.
say
Yes.
it's victim blaming, and the truth is these people took advantage.
Well, that's the old
That's
catchphrase.
but the laws.
That's the old catchphrase you hear from the rich, privileged politician is, if you don't have $1 million or whatever, your family isn't rich, then you just don't deserve it. You didn't work hard enough. That's your fault.
You didn't work hard enough.
That's your fault. Because we tried to hand it to you, you just didn't take it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even long after it becomes ridiculous and a satire of itself, I believe that virtually all baby boomers know in their heart of hearts that millennials got a raw deal. They know in their heart of hearts that they had it much easier when they were kids, right? But they still want to buy into this bootstraps crap. They still want to believe. Millennials who say that the structural problems are too great are just whiners, even though they know in their hearts there's something seriously wrong with it. It's just so much easier to believe that millennials are spoiled whiners and that everything is fine. It's so much easier because then you don't have to come to face with the things that your generation allowed to happen. But this is all moving afield because you wanted to talk about guns, right?
Yes, we did.
Well,
You wanted me to talk about
violence.
Guns, violence, yes, the good stuff. We as people of good conscience and intellectuals, we don't go for violence as a first move. In fact, a huge percentage.
We abhor it. We say,
that's exactly what I was thinking, abhor it.
Yes.
Abhor it, yes.
A huge percentage of us would never sign off on anything that was violent under any circumstances. And a big additional percentage, well, as long as nobody is hurt. So there's a bunch of people that are like, you can't destroy property and you can't hurt people.
Can I explain myself that I sounded like I was very, very hawkish, like, how are you supposed to change things without violence? But I personally don't like boxing. I don't like football because I feel that they are too violent. But I understand that sometimes you do need to bring out the gun.
Well, it can't be, I guess what I'm saying is it can't be something that's just off the table from the beginning because you'll just lose, right? Because what'll happen is your opponents will just continue to raise the ante, right? Like right now, the military can do whatever it wants, right? They can blow shit up in your neighborhood for fun, and they're not even really required to notify you, but because they're so generous, they threw a few flyers around and they told a couple of people because they're such socially responsible people. Before they had their little fun war games and they boys with toys, they let a few people know. They don't require your consent to come into your neighborhood and set off bombs. They don't, right?
No.
So at some point, if you resist them without violence and they counter with violence, you don't have a counter move. You just have a counter move of getting killed or arrested.
And I think that the liberal left has taken that off the table.
They certainly have. And to make matters worse,
because the right has not taken it off the table with their guns.
Right.
Well, the problem is that pretty much every time historically, like violent revolutions or a violent overthrow will eventually become corrupted or through its own, I hate to say that, it's really hackney, violence begets violence crap, but that's pretty much, it spirals out of control. Eye for an eye, everybody's blind,
Yes.
We've talked about revolutions on the show before, and I forget what I've said, so forgive me, listener, if this is a review. But I know I've talked to Jennifer about this ad nauseum. There's this problem, and Gavin, you too as well, there's this problem with revolutions of dictators, right? If you go to a place like Egypt, and you overthrow the dictator with violence, right? Or you go to any corrupt tin pot regime, Syria, and you overthrow the dictator. The problem is that everybody that has any knowledge of how to run government, any knowledge of bureaucracy or the systems that bind society together, they all had to be collaborators, right? They all had to work with the regime in order to learn those skills, to be allowed, well, not necessarily to be allowed to live, but to be allowed to have those positions, to be allowed to acquire those skills. They had to become collaborators. So what do? Once you get rid of the guys at the very top, you have this whole army of collaborators who are the only people that have the skills that you need in the government. So what do? Well, option one, you kill them all. And when you kill them all, you get a very reactionary regime that follows it that may still be better, but it's never really a good solution.
That's what I'm saying.
Right. Like
this is most commonly what happens.
Or the bureaucracy starts building itself again.
Those who hunt monsters need to watch not become monsters. That's the whole thing.
Well, they don't have if you don't have the experience of governing, if you're running a revolution, if you're overthrowing a government, then everything has to be about the guy in charge says it and we all discuss it, but once the decision's done, no one can question it. So you're sort of conditioned for a sort of proto-authoritarianism, and there's nobody that knows how to smooth things over because you done killed them all. And that's option one. Option two is you keep the people alive who are collaborators, and as sure as the sun rises in the east, one of them will become the new dictator. Every time.
Every single time.
They know how.
Always.
They know how.
Right?
That's like death and taxes is one of those sure things in life.
Now, I still think of those two options, option one is marginally better. Take a look at Iran, right, where everybody that collaborated with the Shah had to either die or be kicked out. Well, I still wouldn't want to go to Iran. It's certainly a reactionary regime that arose, but I'm also pretty darn sure that the average Iranian is freer now than they were under the Shah.
I think either option is a crapshoot that you have to keep rolling until you lose anyway. Like, the's no winning that game. That's what I'm saying.
That's kind of what I think. I mean, the only thing I can think of is the French Revolution.
Like, I can't...
Or the American Revolution.
There's very few examples in history of it being successful, and eventually that led to modern America, and we could debate whether even that's nice or not.
Right.
It's it's very uncommon in history to violently or otherwise overthrow, but especially violently overthrow something and have it work out.
But then too, understand that part of that may just be spin that we've been inculcated with. We've all been told that Castro is bad. And as evidence for Castro being bad, they talk about freedoms that we supposedly have that we really don't all have, that they supposedly don't have in Cuba that they may have because we don't know, we can't go there. And they show off how poor the island is because we've been unremitting in our desire to see them destroyed for 75 years. It does not seem to me clear at all from here that we can make a determination on how bad Cuba is, or whether the Cuban Revolution was Fidel in the end just a crazy dictator. Was he the Gaddafi of the Caribbean? That doesn't seem likely.
Really interesting situation, because how much of the negative that's over there is caused by our foreign policy regarding them. You know
But that's something you can't rule out, because all modern examples, all the examples you can think of in the last probably 100 years, take place in the shadow of Pax Americanas, take place in the shadow of our empire. And our empire is very much about destabilizing regimes that we consistently oppose and undermine democracies that don't align with our corporate values. And we consistently support dictatorships that do.
I throw around the term puppet dictator all the time as that's like a matter of U.S. foreign policy is, we don't care who's in charge or anything about what they do or believe or institute in their government as long as they do what we say when we want.
Yeah.
And that is number one and possibly the only thing that matters in U.S. foreign policy.
And that's empire. That's how empire works.
Empire, exactly.
And when you read...
It's a military empire. Yeah. It's like...
When you come back to the shock doctrine, which everybody listening should read, they talked a lot about...
And everyone should watch. The revolution will
not be televised. Yes.
Find it on YouTube.
You can find it on YouTube. Shock doctrine is about the South America generally, and how the U.S. meddled and not only condoned, but cheerled and encouraged war crimes to overthrow democratically elected socialist governments that might not align with U.S. policy. The Revolution Will Be Televised is a movie about the kidnapping of the leader of Venezuela, of their elected leader, who the U.S. always hated. This is Chavez we're talking about.
Yeah.
And the people always loved, right? The people of his country loved him. They never failed to re-elect him until he died mysteriously at the age of 53. But there was no foul play. So I guess we're going to have to assume that he died of natural causes at the ripe old age of 53. Or 58 or whatever it was. But the point is, it's a really good movie about how Chavez took power, and then it was eerie how quickly and how well coordinated this attempt was to have a coup. All the state-owned media was shut down, and vandalized. Chavez was disappeared, and all the corporate media, within hours, was showing the newly self-appointed General Assembly dissolving the Constitution, dissolving the judiciary, taking control of the military to their own general applause. Well, now the Constitution says if Chavez disappears or dies, the vice president becomes the president. Well, that's supposedly the rule of law. So the vice president and a bunch of people managed to get into the palace because eventually the palace guards, ultimately the palace guards decided, well, let him in. So in the end, it came down to the guys with the weapons decided whether they were going to have a revolutionary regime or whether or not they were going to, follow the rule of law. And the guys with the guns, the palace guards, they let the vice president and his retinue in, and then they were able to repair the state-run media apparatus and broadcast out the new government. The people that are saying they're the president are not the president. I'm the vice president, which means that Chavez, who's disappeared, is still the president. But if he doesn't come back, I'm the president. That's what the Constitution says. You can't just throw the Constitution out overnight. And at that point, the public outcry became so overwhelming that they had to unmake all this. And some of those people had to flee back to the U.S. Right? Now, most people that watched this believe the CIA had a hand in it. It's hard to resist that conclusion. But the bottom line is, there's some shady shit going on. And the U.S. certainly would not have been opposed to the post-Chavez regime.
Well, the CIA has a bad reputation. I mean, it's literally a universal joke worldwide that they tried to kill Castro who knows how many times. at least some of those times are definitely true. I mean, we can argue about how many times they tried to kill Castro and how many times but they definitely failed to blatantly assassinate him multiple times.
Yes. Well, it's...
So, like, stuff like that...
Their malevolence is matched only by their incompetence.
Stuff like that is highly suspicious because of that. Because that's been our established... Like, everybody knows that's our foreign policy. We're maybe a little bit better about covering stuff up nowadays.
Right.
Or maybe people just don't give a shit as much anymore. But whatever the case is, that's still clearly our matter of policy.
So this is getting far afield. So the point is, returning to the point, ultimately, unfortunately, in this technological era, it's the people with the guns and the willingness to commit violence that decide the governments. And all of your pretensions of democracy, of popular participations, are true only insofar as you do not challenge the underlying system, the underlying power structure of racism, patriarchy, and capitalism. As soon as you become an existential threat to those things, then you're declared a non-person and disappeared with violence in the most expedient way possible. And if that's the thing that we're facing as people contemplating revolution or a future for humanity, then we have to be prepared for that. We have to have a counter move, and the counter move can't be, we all hold hands, let them spray us with tear gas, because that doesn't really work.
Right. Because they can just shoot you in 1 second, and that's it. And there's no place to talk. There's no place to bring out humanity and emotions. You can just be silenced.
And the fear...
Like nothing happened.
But it's like we were saying before, like if you shoot back and you kill the guy who's going to shoot you, you still killed somebody, and that's going to change you as a person.
I agree.
That doesn't...
I agree.
That affects everybody, is killing another human being. You know what I mean? Regardless of the situation, even in defense, I'm sure it'll affect you. I've thankfully never killed another human being that I'm aware of.
That I'm aware of. That I'm willing to disclose.
No, that I'm sure that I don't know if I've killed another person, but I don't think I have.
Well, thanks for that, Gavin.
But I'm just saying, like, that's the problem you face if you want to say, well, the only reaction to a certain level of violence is you have to react with the violence, is, especially with the weapons of war we have nowadays, like, was to stop them from saying, well, this is like a Democrat state or whatever, we don't agree with us, let's just nuke the fucking place. Let's just nuke them and scorched earth, everything.
And you heard what our...
And it wouldn't take more than a few times of doing that to where, like, that has a drastic effect on the planet as a whole.
Yeah. And two, our guy that is currently our burgeoning dictator, he said you got to take out their families, and everybody in the audience cheered. So we know what his plan is if you resist him.
He cheered on people in his rallies, like beat him up. And remember that guy sucker punched a person at a rally and was like, oh, if he shows himself again, we might have to kill him. And the responses was, well, I'll pay his legal fees. It's okay.
Right. And then there was Eric Trump, one of his worthless sons that said on TV, though, these people that hate my dad, they're just not even people. They don't even...
Yeah, I saw that.
Well, of course, I don't think that anybody that disagrees with these people. But,
Butthead Jr. He looks just like him.
Oh, man. So we have this problem. You have to be willing to...
I think this is a good question to talk for liberals. I think it's something that has not been talked about. We talk about it, but I don't see it in the normal discussion, leftist discussion.
Well, part of it is nobody wants to fall under the attention of the surveillance state, right? Like if you, we all know what happened to Malcolm X. So if you advocate violence, then you can be disappeared under the law, and no one will mind you. If you say, well, I don't advocate violence, but I think there are circumstances where we have to be prepared for it, well, then you're going to, at some point, you'll come under the, the baleful eye of the authorities. And another characteristic, of course, of corrupt regimes is that everything that you do is illegal, is that you're required to break the law in some small way just to get by, right? And that, for some people, breaking the law isn't even a crime. Like I know I go off on this, the Senate president can drink and drive, people can murder people and run for governor. That's right.
I was going to say Alan Fung knows what it's like.
Yeah.
So you can,
do you know that a guy that ran for governor, seriously, as the Republican against Gina Raimondo, killed someone?
I've been told this, yes.
Right.
I
So
mean,
there's literally
accidentally,
But I mean, you guys
he
used
killed
to have
somebody.
you guys had a prominent politician for a long time who was a known mobster.
yeah, who like literally put a cigarette out on a guy's face.
Yeah,
Cigar
he
out
was
on a
like
guy's face.
an actual mobster, and everybody knew it, and they still loved him and kept voting him in.
Right.
So,
that's
who knows?
But he's not a great example because he did actually have some sort of punishment for that. Although it was a country club prison, and then he got out of it, and he's still rich.
I still think, if we go into violence a little bit, I mean, World War II, I think the people that fought in it were affected by it, but felt that they were doing something morally correct that they had to do. And I think that they are justified in that.
It's a lot easier when
the bad guy is gassing millions.
Well, nobody knew about it.
Yeah,
it's a myth.
It's a bomb in London. I mean,
that's really.
It's a myth that we have now. It's a myth that we have now that the Holocaust was known at the time, right? There were hints of it. There were whispers, but even inside of Germany, the appetite of people for wholesale genocide was just not that great.
But
it wasn't ever
point
something that
is
could be.
They use violence.
Well, but you're talking about like.
Were they really? I mean, they were changed. It probably, it was awful that they went to war, but were they made evil? Were they made into, like don't dance with the devil? Otherwise,
Well, I think clearly the French weren't made evil by the extended resistance in France, but I don't think the Swiss are still considered to be successful. They're members of the world community, and they suffered no punishment for their indirect role in the Holocaust. It's a joke how the Swiss were happy to launder the Nazis' gold, when they were trying to round up all these
it's like
Nazis.
literally a cliche in movies.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think that there were resistance movements, but and also too, I don't think that any of them were successful. By the way, I don't think that the French resistance, while it was important and is fascinating, and more people should know about the Maquis, I don't think that they expelled the Nazis. I think that the Allies collectively, of which the French resistance was a part.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that they were still instrumental in a lot of leveraging that. It was definitely the Allied forces in general.
Yeah.
Well, it gets back to you saying that you didn't kill anybody and that you know of.
Yeah.
In a way, the Swiss didn't kill anybody, but they laundered the money. So in us, just like Gina Raimondo didn't kill people by cutting the Medicaid budget.
I should have said
Did
that.
she indirectly?
I should have said that I've never helped anybody that I know has also killed somebody.
Yes.
Right? So that should be that should be another point of contention. To that.
Right, but again, some of that is becoming more philosophical because then it's like, well, at that point, what makes you righteous is the not knowing is what you're alleging there by your statement. So then
that's true, but that's the problem with this whole discussion in general. It's very, very philosophical.
Now, how else could it be? Like I said, if you do directly advocate violence, you can be disappeared. The only thing that's certain is that if there is a revolution, that the state won't hesitate to use force against its own members.
And to know that they will.
Right. Mm-hmm.
They
spend way more effort.
I just want people to talk about.
They spend way more effort trying to persecute and criminalize left-wing resistance than they do right-wing resistance. Right-wingers can say, we will kill anybody that comes take our
guns,
cow taxes, or whatever the hell it is. And
the
government will just say, okay, all right, we'll see you. But Greenpeace can say, well, we're not going to allow this to happen. Well, okay, then we'll just arrest all of you and throw you in prison.
So I have this quote that I want, it sort of has things to do with what we're talking about, but I wanted your feedback. So there was a martyr that was killed back in the 1800s that gave us May Day and the 8-hour day.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, if you think that by hanging us you can stamp out the labor movement, then hang us. Here you will tread upon a spark. But here and there and behind you and in front of you and everywhere the flames will blaze up. Is a subterranean fire. You cannot put it out.
Yeah. The
ground is on fire upon which you stand. Is that naive?
Yes. Because that's what people always say when they're caught. That's what Guy Fawkes said. That's what, the Oklahoma City bomber said. They always think that their sacrifice will cause a mass movement to rise up. And
Sometimes it works.
Yeah, I mean...
Sometimes it works.
It works when there is a mass movement. And the labor movement is interesting because we could talk about that. That could be a whole podcast. We could unpack the labor movement and modern labor unions and things like that. We've done that. We've covered that topic before. But I want to go back to my list here. So
I stole my phone back.
Yeah. So we talked about racism. I don't think we have time to cover racism any greater, except to just assert again.
It's been a while on
that it's the fundamental thing of American society that each new generation of black wealth since the end of slavery has had to be wiped out. And there's been some new edifice every time, but it keeps happening and no one seems to care about it. Even the first black president, when he came up with a program to help troubled homeowners, it mostly helped white people. I was happy to take advantage of it, but before I could, all the black wealth had been wiped out. And we should talk about, there's going to be a recession soon. So in the next 3 to 18 months, I keep saying this just because of historical trends. I mean, every 7 to 10 years there's a recession, so we're due. I mean, it's not any more complicated than that. We're due. Every 7 to 10 years there's some new rationale. But there was an interesting thing that happened on Friday where there was some sort of anomaly with one of these tech stocks like Amazon or these other ones that are like way overvalued. I didn't follow the details because I don't really care. But the interesting thing is, it's one of these things, we've all heard of these, where somebody enters in an order that has a really negative market signal, and it triggers an instant sell-off because there's all of these algorithms out there. They're not smart. There's all these computers. They're just waiting out there. They're waiting for the market to peak so they can dump everything, right? Dump everything before it goes. And even the fastest human being staying at their computer can't react.
Yeah.
And most people aren't able to sit at their computer 24/7.
That's what makes trading places outdated. It's not a guy like Dan Aykroyd or whatever sitting around doing that anymore. Now it's just a bank of computers that immediately react based on a very predictable cycle of numbers.
Right, and these computers, they don't create value, they don't do anything, they just take advantage of people's greed and fear. And these analysts and everybody else, they consistently pay no penalties for preaching safe sex and, barebacking with whores, whatever the financial equivalent is of that analogy, right? Like they consistently pay no penalty for saying be aggressive and then being very conservative, or saying buy A when they're shorting A themselves. There's no penalty for that, and that goes right to Congress, where people like Sheldon Whitehouse can commit insider trading, and nobody can say boo about it because of lawyers said it was legal. Getting back to the point, there's going to be a recession soon, and the recession is going to make all of this much worse, right? So the recession is going to mean that whatever job prospects we have, whatever feelings we have about things being good are going to go away, and the Republicans and the Republican Party generally, and certainly the current administration, is going to work that much harder to suppress turnout in the 2018 elections because they're going to want to retain their power, right? They're going to be afraid of retaining their power because they know that if they're going to have it, they're going to love the taste of it, they're going to not want to give it up. And the recession is going to make that worse. I mean, they're up there, they're trying to invalidate Dodd-Frank, they're trying to deregulate the banks, so all this can happen again. And the algorithms are just sitting there. They all know, all the smart money knows that the stock markets generally, and certainly a few specific stocks, way overvalued. There's going to be a collapse. There's going to be a recession. It's just going to happen. We're due. And the rationale is going to be different, but it's going to happen. And when that recession happens...
Then Donald Trump will start a war.
We can't be any more at war. I mean, I say that, but of course we can always be more at war. But I just heard we're sending guys to the Philippines now to help out that dictator.
Oh, my God.
That doesn't think murder should be illegal.
Well, it's the eternal war, dude.
Yeah.
Did you ever see read 1984?
Right.
That's a big part of how they maintain absolute control is we have to always be vigilant because our eternal enemies will kill us the second we aren't.
Forget the promise of peace and understanding. In the grim darkness of the future, there is only war.
Exactly.
And the recession will make that worse. It'll make there be not necessarily a war. That's the only counter move I can see, but it'll certainly be bad for democracy and bad for Americans generally. And it will exacerbate inequality because recessions always do.
Yeah.
And lastly, we've got a few minutes left to discuss the last thing that we haven't covered, which is the climate. So the planet's fucked. We're not going to stop the oceans from rising. What's plan B? I mean, a lot of people are making hay out of the Paris Accords, like they were somehow going to stop.
Yeah, like I was saying to Jennifer before we started recording, is that even if we had maintained the Paris Accords, they're basically like self-regulating, self-compliance, and you make up what you have to comply to anyway. It's basically just everybody signing off to agree to do whatever the hell they want to do.
It's how our governor
it's a
can
little
tell
more
everyone.
complex than that, but that's basically what it is.
It's how our governor can self-righteously tell everybody that she's in favor of the Paris Accords, but then be all for expanding fossil fuel infrastructure.
Yeah, so even assuming that had stayed in place or is going to or whatever, who cares? It doesn't help. I think even if that had been stringent and rigid, like, I'm not sure personally that there's really much we can do. Like this, again, like you're saying, economically there's a cycle of recession. There's the same thing with the cycle of the way the climate works. And we've exacerbated this, or we've accelerated this course to such a degree that I don't think there's much we can do to prevent or stop it or even really slow it.
Well,
I've been telling people for years I think we should expand into space. We can build colonies on the moon, and on Mars we know there's water on the moon. But there's no immediate profit to it, so nobody gives two shits. It's like, oh, well, we got to spend, a couple $1 billion to build a colony, a self-sufficient colony of people on the moon. Well, what are they going to give us back in return?
Yeah, but if we can do that, why can't we? We need to fix our own planet.
Well, I think we should move to Antarctica.
I think the planet's fucked. That's what I'm saying.
But here's
that's what I was telling you before.
Here's my disagreement than that is that you can't get there's no place on Earth except the deep ocean that's less habitable than the most habitable places on the moon or Mars. Right? The most livable, the nicest, the warmest, the most humid and life-supporting places on the moon or Mars are far more hostile to life than the deepest Sahara or the tallest peaks of Everest.
We're going to have to be building domed cities eventually anyway to stay on this planet. Like, I don't think we're going to have the atmosphere to maintain the conditions of maybe not humans directly, but something in the food chain that's going to cause an avalanche to the point where we won't be able to live outside of our, like, completely artificial environments anyway.
Well, I don't know that I agree with that, but it's an interesting... I'm not so much talking about the function of what the future looks like. I'm talking about... And I agree with you about the Paris Accords.
I'm saying, like, if that's really the only plan that we can have, though. I don't think we can do much to the climate change issue. I think it's already... that our time for that has passed.
Well, my concern with that is, first of all, when you adopt that philosophy, you implicitly say that it doesn't matter anymore if we're burning fossil fuels. I mean, whether or not that's what you mean to say...
Yeah, that's not what I'm saying.
That's a conclusion that can be drawn from the argument that you're making.
Yeah, we're already down that. We can't go back.
And I still think it's worthwhile to try to stop burning fossil fuels, especially methane.
And I don't think that that's wrong. I think that's right. I mean, maybe we can slow it down to such a degree, give ourselves a little bit more time to build the dome cities. Like, that's all I'm saying.
I keep saying dome cities.
That.
I'm telling you, Case of Steel is a great novel. That's all.
Yeah, well, okay, all right. Read Isaac Asimov. That'll be Gavin's contribution today.
Yeah.
So there. But getting back to my point, if we take it as written that we can't stop it, and part of the problem with the Paris Accords, if I may digress briefly, is that one of the problems is we continue to subsidize fossil fuel. Like it seems to the rational, ordinary person, even if you don't think climate change is real, which most people do, but even if you didn't, why would you subsidize oil and penalize clean energy? But in effect, that's what we're doing. There's tremendous amounts. There's this entire complicated series of financial instruments, for example, that are all based on oil exploration and depreciation credits that have no analog in any other industry because they were designed for a period in our history where we wanted to be energy independent from the Middle East, where we were most concerned with nationalistic concerns when it came to energy, and so we wanted to encourage the development of our own fossil fuel reserves, right? So that's the whole legal framework we have under, and there are people that have gotten insanely rich off of. There's a tremendous amount of money that's invested in that, and so the ordinary person would say, well, I want to let the free market decide. I think we should let, But even if we were there, so let's let the free market decide between solar and fossil fuel. Let's make it as fair as possible. Clean energy is just cheaper. It's simply better, right? It's simply better to have solar panels on your house and not pay an electric bill, right? Or to pay a much smaller electric bill. It's simply better to have plants that don't require this big infrastructure that can just generate power that can be placed as power. It's just better. The cost per watt is coming way down on wind and solar and has been for a long time. Right, so even somebody that's a libertarian would say, well, why, if it is competitive, then why isn't it being developed? Well, it's because the government continues to dump all of this money into the pockets of anybody that wants to develop fossil fuels and destroy the planet. I mean, I understand how we got there. Like I said, it's because the issue 50 years ago was we wanted to be energy independent because it was part of our national sovereignty strategy or some other Cold War BS. But now it just seems ridiculous. But we can't get rid of it because all those people that have gotten filthy rich have infiltrated government.
Yeah, well, in the capitalist setup, money equals power as far as political power.
Right.
Especially nowadays, more than ever.
Well, I don't know that it's more than ever. I think it was always this way. But
yeah, it was always, that's what I'm saying. It was always
because
this
there's
way.
because there's so much money, the egregious successes become so much more vivid.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
The gap between the rich and poor, I mean, if you take it to the last analysis, if nobody has anything, if there's zero capital, then we're all equal. And if there's a few units of capital, then there's no way that I can be infinitely better than you with winning one piece of capital, but I can't be that much ahead of you. But the more capital there is, you can still delude yourself, and Americans do delude themselves into thinking that they're participating in a system that is increasing, but it's increasing only for the wealthiest people. And those people, they have total myopia. They're completely focused on short-term interests. Very, very few of them have anything long-term involved. And those that do often meddle in ways that are stupid and uninformed because they think that they're the masters of the universe. Bill Gates and now Mark Zuckerberg with these charter school charities that they're doing. How can they not know that they're destroying public education and making it worse? Well, because they think they're smart. I think they're smart because they're rich. And so they think, I would never be so dumb as to just dump a bunch of money into segregation and call it school reform. But of course, that's what they are. They're stupid. But they think that because they're millionaires, they're smart.
And on that note,
what? So we have
wrap
to
up.
Well, I don't think we're quite there yet.
Too.
I don't think we're quite there yet because we still haven't figured out what Plan B is for the climate. So Gavin wants to build.
We're going to figure it out right now.
As a good reminder to the whole environmental thing, it is extremely hot right here. We're all dripping with sweat. So
well, whatever.
Good stuff. Just an ironic connection.
It's hot where I am. Global warming is destroying the planet. It's cold where I am. Global warming is a myth concocted by liberals.
Yeah.
So the thing that we're not going to solve it because clearly we don't have enough time, that I want to get you guys thinking about, us three at the table and those listeners, is we can no longer delude ourselves into thinking that as environmentalists, people who are concerned with the future of humanity as opposed to the present primarily, or what's going to happen in the next 3 months, but people who want to ensure humanity's future, we have to stop focusing so much on just opposing fossil fuel infrastructure, opposing fossil fuel development. We have to at some point say, we're going to lose that fight. We've already lost it, according to what Gavin has said.
Well, I do know.
And so if we're going to lose that fight, if we can't save the planet from rising oceans, if the rising oceans are going to be a real thing, then what is the next thing that we pour our organizing energy to? Do we continue to, if we keep doing what we've always done, which is to try to protest environmental degradation, then we'll keep getting what we've always got, which is more environmental degradation. So what's the counter move? Do we just roll it into our other thing and just say, well, revolution will take care of all of it? Or do we brainstorm,
Well, I think that people are talking about using machines to take carbon dioxide out of the air. This is actually...
I've heard about that. First of all, carbon dioxide, as we've discussed, is not the biggest problem right now. Methane
they'd also have to replenish the ozone layer because that, at this point, is...
deteriorated too.
Well,
continually deteriorating.
Well,
I wouldn't say it's deteriorated to the point that people exaggerate to, but
the ozone layer actually started healing itself after we stopped using CFCs.
We helped a little bit, and that was a big step. But there's still CFCs that we use. I hate to say, I'm asthmatic. I use an inhaler every once in a while, and that they pack the CFCs in there.
Right, and you're asthmatic because of environmental pollutants.
Yeah,
and and that's the problem is with carbon recapture is that's capitalism's solution. Let's build the machine and profit off the machine that creates the problem. Let's build the machine and profit off the machine that supposedly solves it. And all the externalities of this can be dealt with. The carbon recapture machine, it's got to be made out of aluminum. Okay, aluminum is a tremendously energy-intensive thing to make. Where do you get the energy? Oh, we're going to burn some fossil fuels.
Well, the real question is who's going to profit off of that, though? How are you going to make profit off of a carbon recycler?
Well,
we have these things that recapture carbon. They're called
something-
trees, and there's less and less of them all the time.
Well, I'm just saying I'm not saying that I think we should do that. I'm just saying that is an option that people have proposed, rather than just protesting environmental.
Well, I want you to think about this. For a while, I toyed with, as an intellectual experiment, something called the solar shade. You build a gigantic mirror in space that deflects away a percentage of the light that hits Earth. Think about, in order to deflect, say, 1% of the light, you can actually do the math. I found a place, this was years ago, this was like 10 years ago that I was playing with this thought experiment. You can actually find places online now, I'm sure, that'll calculate the reflectiveness of the material and how big and thick it has to be. And given the vastness of human ingenuity, it's not something that would be impossible. Until you think about what you're fucking saying. Let's build a mirror to reflect the sun away because we can't stop fucking over.
Yeah, but isn't that how the Matrix happens too?
Well,
I'm just saying, I like movies.
The point is, what you're proposing is probably more difficult and complex on a mass scale than a solar shade. So carbon recapture, you just can't recapture enough carbon to keep up with the fossil fuel industry. It can't be done.
Okay.
Jennifer's just saying whatever she has to say to get the podcast to end because she's hot. So I want to leave you with that, though, listeners, that I don't think carbon recapture is a viable idea, and I don't think that the caves of steel are a viable idea either, because one thing about the caves of steel is, inside the caves of steel, it is a corrupt, bureaucratic meritocracy. There's not a wealthy elite at the top. It's a better society than we have now because it's arisen out of the ashes of poverty. But I don't think we would ever get there. If Earth was ruled, we would have something much more like Elysium, where the rich move off planet and they build a paradise on the moon or wherever the fuck, like you're saying, and the rest of us have to live down here and mine the raw materials they need for their space project.
And that's probably much more likely. I think that's actually probably the inevitable future.
I think we should move to Antarctica. All right, that's the last note on that. I think we'll let go because Jennifer is freaking out. So thank you all for listening, and we will see you again in a week or month or however long it is. Bye.